been asking when you'll finally feel ready. That was never the right question. You asked it before the job change you keep circling back to, before the conversation you've rehearsed in the shower, before every version of your life you almost started. And somewhere in there, you started believing the answer would arrive before the doing did. Right now, somewhere in your life, there's a door you're standing in front of, your hand resting on the handle. Maybe it's the phone call you keep rehearsing instead of making, or the resignation letter still saved as a draft. Something in you has been waiting for a green light that was never going to come from outside. By the end of this, you won't need it to. There's a sentence a Roman emperor wrote to himself, alone at night, and I'm going to give it to you, but not yet. Not until you understand why a man who ruled the world still needed to write it down. Here's what nobody tells you about waiting to feel ready. It doesn't feel like waiting. It feels like preparing. You tell yourself you're doing the responsible thing, reading one more book, taking one more course, making one more list of everything that could go wrong before you let yourself try. It feels productive. It feels careful. And somewhere underneath all of it, quietly, you already know it's fear, wearing a very convincing disguise. And here's the thing worth saying before anything else. This isn't a flaw in your character. It's not laziness and it's not weakness. No matter what the voice in your head says at 2 a.m. when it lists everything you should have done by now. You were taught, somewhere along the way, that certainty comes before action. That confidence is a prerequisite, not a result you earn afterward. Nobody sat you down and told you this directly. You absorbed it slowly, the way you absorb most of the rules that quietly run your life without ever being spoken out loud. So let's actually look at it, not the idea of it. The specific physical shape it takes in your actual days, the ones nobody else sees. It's 3 a.m. and your heart is doing that fast, shallow rhythm again, while you draft the email you're never gonna send. You write it in your head, word for word, and by the time the sun comes up, you've talked yourself out of it twice. There's a tightness in your jaw right before you open the banking app, just to check one more time whether you could actually survive without the job you can't stand. You close it before the numbers even finish loading. Somewhere in the scroll, you pass someone your age who just launched the thing you've been circling for years, and you feel your stomach drop. Not because you're not happy for them, because some part of you assumes they must have felt ready in a way you never have. They didn't. You just can't see the part where they didn't either. Someone who loves you asks gently across the table, "So what's the plan?" And you hear yourself say, "Soon," again. And you watch something small flicker across their face, not disappointment exactly. Something quieter. Something like recognition, that they've heard this word from you before. Your mother asks at the end of every phone call, in the same light tone she's used for years, whether you've thought any more about it. You say the same thing you always say, and you both let it go, gently, the way two people do when neither wants to be the one who pushes. The coworker 2 desks over, the one you actually trust, leans in sometimes and asks if you're still thinking about leaving. You say yes. You mean it. Then Monday arrives again, and the meeting gets moved, and the week fills itself in around you the way weeks always do. And somehow another month passes without you noticing exactly when. The folder on your desktop has been sitting there for months. The one you renamed Draft, so it would stop staring at you every time you open your laptop. You haven't deleted it. You haven't opened it either. Somewhere in a closet, there's the version of you that used to run, or paint, or play music, whatever it was that made you feel like yourself, sitting untouched, waiting for a version of you with more time, more energy, more certainty. That version keeps not arriving, and somewhere along the way, without ever deciding to, you've quietly stopped expecting it to. Here's the part that's hard to say out loud, so I'll just say it plainly. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are not missing some piece of information that everyone else already has, and you somehow don't. What you're actually doing every single day you wait is treating a feeling like it's a checkpoint, as if somewhere ahead of you there's a moment where the fear finally clears, the doubt finally quiets, and you finally get the internal permission slip you've been refusing to start without. That moment isn't coming. Not tomorrow, not after the next course, not after the next round of research. Not because you're doing something wrong, because it was never real to begin with. Sit with that for a second. It's a strange kind of grief. Realizing the finish line you've been walking toward for years doesn't actually exist, and never did. Not a failure on your part, just a rule you were handed early that you never got the chance to question until right now. But it's also, if you let it be, the quiet beginning of something else. Because if readiness was never the gate, then something else has been standing in for it this whole time. And whatever that something else is, it's been quietly calling itself preparation. Preparation isn't the problem. Preparation is a real, useful thing when it has an ending, a door on the other side of it that you actually intend to walk through. The problem starts when preparation stops being a bridge and quietly becomes a residence. When the research, the planning, the almost ready keeps expanding to fill exactly as much time as you're willing to give it, and never one day less. You've probably done this, not because you're avoiding the thing you want, because avoiding it, dressed up as diligence, feels like effort instead of fear. Effort earns you a story you can tell people at dinner. Fear doesn't. So the fear puts on the effort's clothes, and nobody in the room, including you, questions it. And effort feels safer than fear, even when the two of them are aimed at the exact same door, wearing the exact same face. Let me tell you how this actually plays out, because it's easier to see from the outside than it ever is from inside your own head. You decide you want to change your work, the kind of work that actually feels like yours, instead of something you're just tolerating, something you clock out of and forget the second you're in the car. So you start preparing. You take a course, It's good. You learn something real, something useful. You tell yourself you'll apply the next month. Once you've finished it, you finish it, and you enroll in another one, because you notice a gap in what you know. And surely it's better to fill it first, before you put yourself out there. 8 months pass this way, quietly, one reasonable next step after another, each one making complete sense entirely on its own. Then, one ordinary Tuesday, you get offered a promotion in the job you were trying to leave in the first place. More money, more title, more reasons to stay exactly where you already are. And you take it, not because you actually wanted it, but because it was the first concrete thing anyone had handed you in 8 months of preparing for something that never quite arrived on its own. A year later, you're further from the life you were preparing for than you were the day you started. Your evenings belong to the new title now, the way they used to belong to the courses, and somewhere in the transition, the courses stopped, and nothing replaced them. Not because you failed, because the preparing had quietly become the whole plan, without you ever agreeing to that trade, and nobody sent you a notice when the switch happened. This is the part almost nobody says plainly, the part that gets skipped over in every article about finding your passion. More research doesn't create readiness. It creates more research. Confidence isn't something you accumulate in advance, like savings in an account. It's something that shows up after you've already started, built from actual evidence that you can survive doing the hard thing, not from imagining in advance that you already have. There was a man who understood this better than almost anyone in history, and it's worth knowing who he actually was, not just his name on the cover of a book. Marcus Aurelius ran the largest empire on earth. He commanded armies. He held the kind of power most of us can't fully picture in a single lifetime. And most nights, in a tent near the edge of that empire, exhausted, sick, uncertain whether he was doing any of it right, he wrote to himself. Not for readers, not for history, just notes, in the dark, from one tired man to himself, because even an emperor needed something to remind him how to keep going. He never gave the notebook a title. Later generations called it Meditations, but what he actually called it, in his own language, translates roughly to himself. It wasn't written for an audience of one exactly. It was written by one, for one, on nights when the empire's weight sat on his chest, and no version of confidence had shown up to carry it for him. He wasn't writing because he felt ready. He was writing because he didn't, and at some point, he'd simply stop waiting for that to change before he picked up the pen anyway. So here's the lie, stated plainly. The one underneath all that careful preparing. You've been telling yourself that once you finally feel ready, you'll act. But it runs the other way entirely. The feeling doesn't come first. It never has. Not for you. Not for anyone who ever did the hard thing before you. Readiness isn't the cause of starting. It's what starting eventually produces, quietly after the fact, the way calluses show up after the work, never before it. Let that land for a second before the next part. It changes everything about how you look at the waiting once you actually see it. Because once you actually see that, once you understand that the feeling you've been waiting for is downstream of the decision and not upstream of it, something else becomes possible. The Stoics had a word for what happens next, for the exact moment someone stops waiting for the feeling and starts trusting the decision instead. And once you understand what that word actually means, not as a definition on a page, but as something you can feel in your own chest, the door you've been standing in front of stops looking closed. The word is one you've probably heard before, maybe without ever really feeling its weight. The Stoics called it the dichotomy of control. It sounds almost too simple to matter until you actually apply it to your own life instead of just nodding along and moving on. Some things are yours to control. Most things aren't. You cannot control whether you feel ready. You never could, and you never will. Not because something's wrong with you, but because readiness was never a lever you had access to in the first place. You also can't control how the conversation goes once you have it. Whether the answer is yes, whether people understand, whether it turns out exactly the way you pictured it at 2 a.m, staring at the ceiling. You can't control whether it works out perfectly or whether it's messy for a while first. But you can control whether you send the email today instead of drafting it again in your head for the 100th time. You can control whether you open the folder instead of walking past it on your desktop one more time. You can control whether you say the true thing out loud the next time someone you love asks you what the plan is, instead of saying soon and watching their face do that same small flicker. That's the whole shift. Not becoming fearless, not finally arriving at some permanent state of confidence you've been chasing for years like it's a destination on a map. Just quietly moving your attention off the one thing you were never gonna control and putting it gently onto the one thing you always did. Seneca wrote to a friend once about exactly this. He said it isn't that our lives are short. It's that we waste so much of what we're given, postponing the parts that actually matter until some more convenient version of ourselves shows up to live them. He wasn't talking about death as a threat. He was talking about it as a kind of honesty. Every month you spend circling the door instead of walking through it is a month you don't get back and wouldn't have wanted back anyway, if you're honest about what it actually felt like to live inside it. That's not meant to frighten you into rushing. It's meant to loosen the grip of the waiting, just slightly, by reminding you what it's quietly costing. Marcus Aurelius wrote something to himself in that tent on one of those long, uncertain nights. And it's the sentence I promised you at the very start of this. It wasn't long. It wasn't complicated. He didn't wait to feel like a good man before deciding to be one. He wrote simply that it was time to stop arguing about what a good man should be and just be one. Not eventually. Not once he felt like it. Once the doubt cleared. Once the timing improved. Now, as he was, uncertain and tired and afraid he might get it wrong anyway, in a tent at the edge of an empire. with nobody watching. That's it. That's the whole permission slip you've been waiting for. And it was never going to arrive wrapped in certainty, because it was never a feeling to begin with. It's a decision, made by someone who didn't feel ready either, and made it anyway, one sentence at a time, in the dark. You don't need to feel ready to send the email. You just need to send it. You don't need to feel ready to open the folder or make the call or say the true thing at the table instead of the easy one, the soft one, the one that buys you another few months of quiet. You need to do the thing and let the feeling catch up later, the way it always eventually does, quietly, once there is actual evidence for it to stand on, evidence that only exists on the other side of having already started. Take a slow breath right where you are, wherever that happens to be tonight. Feel your feet, if you're standing, or the weight of your body against whatever is holding you up right now. The chair, the couch, the floor. Notice the room around you exactly as it is. Nothing added. Nothing needing to be different yet. There's nowhere else you need to be for this next part. Just here, breathing for a moment, before anything else is asked of you. Whatever it is for you, whatever door you've been standing in front of with your hand already resting on the handle, it doesn't need your fear to leave first. It's been waiting for you to stop asking permission from a feeling that was never actually gonna give it, no matter how long you stood there. This isn't a call to go do something big tonight. It isn't a countdown, and it isn't a challenge. And there's no version of this where you owe anyone proof by morning. No version where you have to post about it, announce it, or prove to a single other person that something shifted. It's just the truth, sitting quietly in the room with you. You are allowed to begin exactly as you are, uncertain, a little afraid. Not fully sure it will go well, or that you'll say the right thing, or that it will land the way you hope. That was true for an emperor with an entire army behind him. And it's true for you now, sitting exactly where you are. And it was never actually a problem that needed solving. It was only ever a problem when you mistook it for a stop sign instead of what it actually was. Just weather passing through while you were already free to walk. Let the folder stay open a little longer this time. Let the phone stay unlocked, the number already dialed, your thumb resting near the call button instead of pulling away from it at the last second, the way it always has before. You don't have to feel steady to be steady enough. You already are. And you have been for longer than you realized. Somewhere tonight you'll close your laptop, or turn off the light, or set your phone down on the table beside you, and something in the room will feel a little different than it did this morning. Not because anything outside you has changed, not because the fear is gone, or because you suddenly feel like a different person than the one who woke up this morning still waiting. Because you finally stopped waiting for permission that was never gonna come from anywhere but you. That's the whole difference. Not confidence, not certainty. Just one small, quiet decision to stop treating a feeling as a locked door. The door was never locked. It never was. Your hand has been on it the whole time. This whole time, waiting for a feeling that was never going to be the one to move it. You can turn it now.